No matter its form, horror is embedded into nearly every aspect of our society, from gothic clothing to reams of occult-centric text, and especially your cooking skills at university. It seems that everywhere we look there's something to remind us of death, chaos, and our fear of the unknown. And there is no better medium to exploit our darkest worries than video games themselves. By placing the player in direct control of a digitized avatar, you blur the separation of the two worlds, and therefore any damage or harm done to the character has a greater impact on the person holding the controller. And it's certainly a popular section of the gaming industry, as horror titles have been flooding the market with jump scares, horrible beasties, and of course, brutal depictions of violence. However, with such a cavalcade of corpses, it's meant that some true horror gems have been buried more than 6 feet deep. Therefore, it's time to bust out the shovel and unearth those that might not have been given enough chance to shine, but can still send shivers down those spines. With this in mind, I'm Jules, this is What Culture Horror, and these are 10 forgotten horror video games that will scare you senseless. Number 10, Sweet Home. So there's some good news and some bad news with this game. The good news is that Sweet Home is one of the most engaging horror titles released for the Famicom, presenting a truly creepy art style and genuinely impressive RPG elements. The bad news is that this game is a Japanese exclusive, so you best get to learning the language or pay a hefty price tag for an import. That being said, it's truly worth the investment, as this survival horror slash RPG delivers a devilishly tense tale of a group of filmmakers who break into a mansion in search of some rare artwork, only to discover that this huge house is haunted from top to bottom. What makes this game so utterly tense is that you've got RPG tropes like random battles and exploration, mixed in with survival horror elements like limited resources and often overwhelming enemies. It's thrilling and will leave you screaming when enemies pop up at the worst possible time. Also, it's a title that's based on a film, so if you don't fancy having what amounts to a 10-hour heart attack, you can catch the original Sweet Home online. Number 9, Galerions. Galerions is hands down my type of game. It's got that lovely slash horrible aesthetic where every corridor and character looks absolutely grimy, a bit broken and quite possibly just a bit off, and it makes it drip with this unpleasant feeling. And it's got the tight Resident Evil fixed camera angles, meaning that there's a sense of claustrophobic dread in every scene. Plus, you get to obliterate people with psychic powers. I forgot to lead with that bit. However, before you think this game is going to be like Second Sight or Psyops, the survival horror elements come in hard to crash the party. Using your abilities with wanton abandon will leave you completely vulnerable, as they drain what amounts to a stamina meter very quickly, and replenishments are very, very hard to come by. This is what makes Galerion so utterly special, that you're a walking supernova of power, but one that is completely unstable. The voice acting and plot are grade A cheese, which will act as a love letter to fans of the schlocky horror movie subgenre, but at its heart, the tension and horror that comes from witnessing the exploitation of human guinea pigs, well, it's genuinely palpable. Number 8, Nightmare Creatures. Whereas most horror video games generate their scares by removing any sense of empowerment from the player in order to make vulnerability a theme that is front and center, Nightmare Creatures does exactly the opposite, in that it makes you a demon-slaying badass capable of cutting a zombie in two with nothing but a staff. So how does this create moments of genuine shock and fear? Well, by clever direction, art style, and by making every enemy capable of dealing massive damage to you. It's a game that says, yes, you probably could break a brick into tiny pieces just by looking at it, but if you mess up, my lord, you're going to be in a world of pain. Playing this on the PS1 as a child was truly a horrific experience, as the draw distance masked by the fog on most levels meant that you couldn't often see the terrors that were just waiting to ambush you until it was too late. As the game progresses, it introduces ludicrous death traps and puzzles, which means that you have to balance your combat powers with platforming, and seeing as every slip could mean an instant death, it was deliciously terrifying from start to finish. Number 7, Kudelka. Kudelka is a supremely strange title in that it was originally never going to be a horror game. The developer Saknoth was actually set up by an ex-Squaresoft employee who wanted to make RPGs. However, thanks to corporate pressure in the face of the runaway hit that was Resident Evil, this vision was altered to incorporate more horror elements. Eventually, Kudelka became a horror title with RPG trappings. However, when you think of Final Fantasy and Resident Evil mashing together, how could you not want to play this game? Also, it makes me think of Parasite Eve, and why haven't we got a remake of that yet? Utilizing a rather brilliant battle mechanic which forces the player to move party members around a small battle arena, Kudelka is a title that rewards tactical thinking while also making you squirm as you push characters into stabbing range of some truly creepy enemies. And trust me, you'll need to get close and personal, as ranged ammunition is scarce, and thanks to the battle system demanding that you keep pushing enemies back, you'll need a front line of defense against the horrors that reside within this terrifying mansion. Number 6. Darkseid. Do you like the Alien franchise? Do you like genuinely uncomfortable and stilted acting? Do you like mullets? Well, if you do, then Darkseid is the game for you, my friend, as this title is so incredibly odd that I can feel my skin crawling just from looking at stills of it. At first glance, it appears that it will just be another point-and-click adventure game, but when your first night's sleep involves our character Mike getting his head torn open by something that even H.R. Geiger would say, that's a bit phallic there, friend, you know that things are about to drop off a bloody cliff. In fact, if the art does look more than a little like Geiger's, he was actually approached by Cyberdreams, the developers, with the planned artwork, and he gave his blessing. What transpires next is a hauntingly eerie game that feels like a lost episode of The Twilight Zone, with genuinely unnerving interactions with the townsfolk giving way to pure unadulterated horror when Mike explores alien worlds that appear purpose-designed to incite disgust. Pushing you through this is the fact that Mike will die from an alien embryo that's been planted into his brain, so not only do you have to face some truly grim imagery, but you have to do so under a time limit. Number 5. Harvester. It might seem like a bit of a horror feature double bill, but you can't really mention Darkseid without also tipping a hat to Harvester, which again is easily one of the weirdest games I've ever played. It's not a horror game in a gothic gloom sense, but a hyperbolic attack on suburban living, where your next door neighbor could well be killing cats to replace the meat for his butcher shop. Harvester is an exploitation film given video game form and is utterly overwhelming in its assault on the senses, offering horribly hammy FMV sections, point-and-click adventuring, and more sleaze and sex than you could stomach. None of it feels right, none of it feels connected in a way that's pleasing to the player, and it's for these reasons that Harvester just works so damn well at delivering an uncomfortable feeling that will linger for weeks. And there's also a man with half a torso who can shoot you and then launch nuclear weapons should you tell him that you're a Russian. Yeah, it's a weird game. Number 4. Cold Fear. I'm genuinely gutted that Cold Fear never really got the reaction that it deserved upon its release, as this title is a true horror gem just waiting to be rediscovered by the community. However, its release a mere 2 months after the almighty Resident Evil 4 definitely truly scuppered this ship your pants title's chance of making waves. However, if you choose to venture on board Ubisoft's first ever stab at the horror genre, you'll find a game that is truly unnerving. While first appearing like a stock horror title, the setting of a Russian whaling ship introduces something truly inspired, as at random points the ship will buck from the rough ocean water and cause the player to stumble, lose their accuracy, or even force them to cling on for dear life. This, as you can imagine, creates a dynamic sense of fear unlike anything else on this list. For now, not only do you have to deal with the parasite-infected enemies, but do so with the looming threat that even your meager defenses could be scuppered by the roar of the ocean. Number 3. Sanitarium. Sanitarium is a truly unnerving game. It's not one that will bathe the player in gore, nor one that will have them hunted by enemies they can't defeat, but it's one that ventures into the surreal so heavily that you genuinely start to feel like you're losing the plot. Awakening in a, you guessed it, sanitarium, the player must try to piece together why they are there, or even if it's real at all. As you progress, your character will morph into other forms, such as a little girl who must navigate a terrifying haunted carnival, or even a bloody centaur as you roam through absolute mythic madness. Contrasting these moments are sections of painful reality which only serves to heighten these LSD-style trip moments. It's not a game that will leave you afraid to turn the light off at night, but one that will make you afraid of what your brain will then dream of. It's haunting in a very different sense, and I adore Sanitarium all the more for it. Number 2. Obscure. It actually seems quite fitting that a video game with such a name would make it onto a list about forgotten horror gems, doesn't it? Obscure is a title that wears its inspirations proudly, citing Resident Evil's body horror monsters and tight camera angles as it details its own brand of horror. You see, one of Obscure's main selling points is that, unlike many other titles in the genre, you are not alone. Instead, you take control of 5 teenagers, each with different skills as they try to navigate a creepy school setting. This means that you can switch between characters on the fly in order to solve certain puzzles and problems. You can even get your mate to play along with you thanks to a 2-player option. And you will need to work together in pairs, because the enemies in this game are weakened by light. Therefore, it's imperative for one player to shine light on the horrors while the other player finishes them off. This creates tense action moments that play wonderfully with the campy Buffy the Vampire setting. Absolute bliss. And number 1, 3D Monster Maze. It might seem utterly bizarre to place this game so highly when you consider its rustic presentation, but honestly, for the purest scares out there, look no further than the 1981 ZX Spectrum titled 3D Monster Maze. Operating on a system with about as much memory as a goldfish, creator Malcolm Evans had to squeeze everything that he could out of the hardware in order to make 3D Monster Maze. What this resulted in was a game that had an incredibly simple premise, that being solve the maze without being eaten by the T-Rex. But it's a title that expertly hits a horror nerve thanks to the status line text that Evans chose to include. In order to give the player a warning about what the T-Rex is doing, lines of text pop up at the bottom of the screen, and trust me, nothing is more terrifying than seeing the words, "Run, he is right behind you." In that one instance, your careful plodding and attempts to solve the maze are completely thrown out of the window as suddenly you now have to keep running and pray you don't hit a dead end. It's not the flashiest title for sure, but it's easily one of the purest horror experiences out there. So do yourself a favor and check it out. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 forgotten horror video games that will scare you senseless. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below, as well as any other choices that you might have had, because who knows, I might do a commenter's edition further down the line. If you want to chat to me further about all things to do with horror and video games and anything else, you can do so over on Twitter at RetroJ. Or you can go and check me out on my personal gaming channel, Live and Let's Dice, where I'm doing tons of live streams and board games. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. We detailed today a lot about the unseen, the things that we're afraid of, but you know what? Let's try and calm our nerves and end with something a bit more positive. But this is the thing, sometimes we can create our own fears and roadblocks in our mind, and there's no shame at admitting that sometimes you need help to get over them. Friends, family, professionals in the support industry, all of these people care about you and want you to do well. You are a massive ledge, and you do not deserve to be made to feel otherwise by anything, so I hope that that helps. Big love from me to you. Now go out there and smash it, you big ledge. As always, I've been Jules, you have been awesome, never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.